Hey guys, David East here, and in part 2 of this tutorial, we're going to be going over creating a menu for our mailer application. So now that we have our list set up, let's actually focus on creating the HTML. So as you can see, there's a top menu and then there's a left menu. The top menu expands the whole width of the page, and the left menu expands the whole height of the page. Expanding the whole width of the page is pretty easy, but expanding the whole height of the page can be pretty tricky. Each of the menus has the same background color, and there's a couple of icons in here, but we're not going to need to sprite them out because they're used in Flat UI. Later in this project, you'll see a couple of icons that aren't used in Flat UI, but I did us all a favor and created a sprite sheet for those. So let's focus on creating the top header. So we should start off by being semantic. And to be semantic, we'll use a header tag. And we're going to give this header a class of top menu. And inside of this header, we're going to declare the logo, and we'll use an h2 for that. And we'll give the h2 a class of logo. And the next piece of the menu is the navigation. So keeping up with being semantic, we'll use a nav tag, and we'll give it a class of top menu nav. And we'll use an unordered list to display the navigation items. And we'll give that a class of top menu nav list. And some of you might think this is way too many classes. However, at first, I like to abstract all my styles out into classes because you never know what you might need later on. And now we'll add the list items that should appear in the UL. And as you can see, they're in an LIA format. So now let's create a list style for this top menu. We'll start off with our top menu class. We'll nest in our logo, and then we'll also nest in our top menu nav. And inside of the top menu nav, we'll nest in our top menu nav list. Within there, we're nesting in our LI and our A. So let's start out by giving it some basic styles. We'll give the top menu a background of the primary BG, and then we'll assign the logo its font size and its color. The logo's text color will just be white, and then the font size is the logo font size. We'll give the top menu nav a display of inline block, and we'll do the same for the list items. And we'll give the anchor tag a color of gray medium. And now before we can see these styles get applied, we're going to have to import this file into the mailer.less file. So we know that our styles are being applied, but there's still a lot of work left to do. What I like to do sometimes to get more of a visual indication of what's going on is to actually edit inside of Chrome. So pulling up the Chrome developer tools, I can look at the styles that are going on inside of the page. Right now we can see that there's a tiny gap at the top of the page in our header. To fix that, we can actually do a margin top of -3 pixels. And we can immediately see that gap go away. So right now we want both of these to be on the same line. So let's go to the H2 and let's set its display to inline block. And now we have them both on the same line. But this isn't really what it looks like in the PSD. So we're going to have to take a look at the PSD and gather some more information. But before we take a look at the PSD, we need to take the styles that we applied in Chrome and bring them down to our local project. So we set a display of inline block on the logo, and we bumped up the margin top by -3 pixels. So we'll set the margin top to -3 pixels, and we'll set the display of the logo to inline block. And now you can see that the styles are taking effect from our local copy. Some of you, however, might not be getting these changes even though you added them to our local copy. And that's because sometimes you need to clear out your cache when you refresh the page. And if you're using Chrome, a really nice way to do that is if you have the developer tools pulled up, you can right-click on the refresh button, and you can click on Empty Cache and Hard Reload. It'll take a bit longer, but it'll make sure that your changes are applied. So now to the PSD. So let's measure how tall the header is. So we can see that the header is 75 pixels in height, and the mailer logo actually takes up 185 pixels in width. And we can see that there's 30 pixels in between the logo and from where the nav starts. And also we know that we have to set the padding of the logo to 25 pixels from the left. And also each list item inside of the nav has 40 pixels of padding in between each other. So below common padding inside of our variables file, let's create some variables for the top menu. So all the variables are prefixed with top-menu. And the first one is for the height, which is 75 pixels. And the second one's for the width, which is 100%. And then we set the background, which is the primary BG. And then we want to set the item color, which is that gray medium we were using. And we're going to set the padding right for the items, which will be 20 pixels. And then we'll set the font size for the items, which will be 17 pixels. And we'll set the width for the logo, which is 185 pixels. So back in our top menu less file, let's set the height. And the height is top menu dash height. And then we're also going to have to set the line height so everything's vertically centered. And then we'll set the width. And then we'll set the padding left, which is a common padding. And that's menus padding left. So now let's set the width of the logo. And we can't just set it to top menu logo width, which is 185 pixels. We need to offset the padding that we're doing to the top menu. So we actually can do some math and we can subtract menus padding left from the top menu logo width. And now we'll give the top menu nav a padding left of 30 pixels, which is stored in common padding as content padding left. And now lastly, we need to set the styles for the list item. First, its font weight needs to be bold, and then we need to set the padding right, which is 20 pixels. And that's stored in a variable called top menu item padding right. And let's set the font size, and that's top menu item font size. And let's check our styles in the browser. So this looks a little bit more like it. However, the text isn't completely centered vertically. And even though we're setting the line height to 75 pixels, which is equivalent of the height, we're moving up the margin -3 to get rid of that gap. So we're going to have to compensate for that. So now it's centered properly at 78 pixels. So let's go back and update that style on our local copy. So we could just add 3 pixels onto the line height, but let's create some variables to add some consistency. So we'll create a variable called top menu margin bump, and that'll be assigned to 3 pixels. And then we'll create another variable called top menu margin top. And here we'll set that to the negative value of margin bump. So we can use simple mathematical properties in a really powerful way. So now we'll change the margin top property to use the variable we just declared. And then we'll add the margin bump onto the line height. And now let's run this in the browser. So now we can see that we have the 78 pixels and the -3 pixels, so the math for both variables worked properly. So we have the first part of the top menu worked out, but we don't have the second part of the top menu, which is the search box. So we can see that this search box is around 222 pixels in width, and we can see that the height is around 34 pixels. And we're going to have a border radius of something around 16 pixels. And we're also going to have to put this little search icon in our text box. So below the nav inside of our header, let's create a div and give it a class of search container. And inside of the search container, we'll place in our text box. And it just has a search box with a placeholder of search. So as we can see in Chrome, we're not exactly getting what we want. So let's inspect the element. So let's start out by getting this text box at the right height and width. So we'll give it a height of 34 pixels and a width of 222 pixels. And we'll give it a border radius of 16 pixels. And we'll also remove the border. And it disappeared because its background color is white. So we need to move this search box to the right inside of the header. So let's go to the container, and let's set the display to inline block, and then let's float it to the right. So now that it's inside the header, we need to get it centered vertically, so let's go to the text box, and let's set the line height to 34 pixels. And now we're going to set the margin to the right by 25 pixels. And then we'll also give some padding inside the text box. So now let's apply these styles to our local copy and work on getting that search icon inside the text box. So we actually can just copy these styles right here for the search box. And below the styles for top menu nav, we'll create one called search container. And inside search container, we'll create one for search box. And we'll paste in the styles from Chrome. And now we need to paste in the styles for search container, which is just setting the display to inline block and then floating it to the right. But there is actually one more style we need to apply to search container. And we need to set the right padding of the search container to 25 pixels. And we need to remove the margin right of 25 pixels from the search box. And the reason why we wanted to add the padding to the search container is that we want to push away on the container level rather than the item level. So anything inside the container will be pushed away as well. And also we have a variable for the padding right. And speaking of variables, we could go out and create variables for the search box and the container, but this will be the only place with a text box like this, so it'll be fine for now just to keep this as the hard-coded values. But now we need to add the icon inside the search box. So we can set the background to the URL with an image called iconsearch.png. So as you can see to the right, it's not exactly what we want, and that's because the image is obviously being repeated, and we're not setting the background to white. So let's fix that in Chrome. So the first thing we're going to want to do is to specify no repeat. So now we just have one image. Then we're going to want to specify scroll, and then we're going to want to specify where we want this image. So we're going to say 190 pixels, and then 9 pixels, and then set the background to white. So now our search box looks just the way we want it to. So let's bring this property down to our local version. So after the background, we'll say no repeat, scroll, 190, 9, and then we'll use a variable for white. So in this tutorial, we created the top menu. In the next tutorial, we'll work on the left menu. And just like always, if you have any questions or want anything explained in more detail, just leave a comment.